Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel where we witness the most profound and sacred journeys of the human heart. Have you ever wondered if the true value of a man is found in the cold, sterile glass of a skyscraper or in the warm, soot-stained walls of a cottage where love is the only currency? Today we bring you a story of a breathtaking sacrifice, a moment when a king deliberately burns his bridge back to a hollow empire to protect the only soul that makes him feel alive. In this heart-wrenching chapter, we see Jame face his past with a fierce and noble defiance, proving that while his father can blacklist his name, he can never confiscate his spirit. Stay with us as we witness the ultimate confrontation between the arrogance of wealth and the unbreakable dignity of a man in love. The setting sun cast a fierce orange glow over the tranquil fields of the village, but the peace of the late afternoon was shattered by the aggressive mechanical roar of an approaching fleet. Three pitch-black luxury cars, their polished surfaces reflecting the golden light like cold obsidian blades, tore through the dust of the rural road, eventually screeching to a halt in front of a modest, weathered cottage. This was the humble refuge Jame and Diep had built with their own bare hands, a structure of bamboo and dried leaves that stood as a sacred and noble monument to their survival. As the car doors opened, releasing a team of stoic, suited men, the sterile and suffocating aura of Mr. Hohn's world bled into the dusty ground of the countryside. They brought with them a wooden chest, intricately carved and overflowing with gold and diamonds, a dowry of humiliation designed to buy back a son's pride and erase the woman who had become his everything. Inside the dim interior of the shack, where a single oil lamp flickered against the wooden walls, Jame felt the familiar, icy chill of his father's malice. He did not need to see the cars to know that the ghost of his past had finally tracked them down to this forgotten corner. He stood by the window, his large, muscular frame casting a shadow over the dirt floor. He wore only a dirty, torn gray tank top, his skin smudged with the honest grime of a man who spent his days tilling the earth and gathering wood. Every muscle in his body tightened as he watched the Tay Sai approach their bamboo gate. Beside him, Diep was trembling, her face pale and her eyes wide with a sense of agonizing and soul-wrenching fear. She clutched the fabric of his worn shirt, her spirit shattered by the sudden intrusion of the world that had once tried to destroy her. Jame turned to her, his gaze intense and radiant with an unshakable devotion. He took her trembling hands into his rough, calloused palms, hands that were once meant for signing billion-dollar deals, but were now the only shield she had against the storm. He whispered to her that no matter how many diamonds they placed at his feet, they were nothing but cold stones compared to the warmth of her smile. He promised that he would rather share a cold meal of rice in this dot-nat cottage than sit at a diamond-covered table in a palace that had no heart. With a fierce and noble determination, James stepped out onto the dirt porch, his bare feet grounding him to the life he had chosen. He looked at the men in suits, his eyes reflecting the fire of the setting sun, and prepared to deliver a message that would finally sever the chains of his old empire. The lead henchman, a man whose face was as cold and lifeless as the marble floors of Mr. Hohn's estate, stepped forward and kicked the bamboo gate open with a sneer of pure arrogance. He placed the intricately carved wooden chest onto the dirt floor, the golden latches catching the dying sunlight. With a practiced, dismissive motion, he flipped the lid open, revealing a blinding treasure of gold bars and diamond necklaces that seemed to mock the poverty of the surroundings. He looked at James' dirty, torn gray tank top and delivered the message from the abyss. Mr. Hohan would restore James' title and legacy, but only if he walked away from the rural shadow behind him and never looked back. The air grew heavy with a suffocating tension, the silence of the countryside becoming a battleground for a man's ultimate choice. For a split second, the cold glint of the gold reflected in James' eyes, a reminder of the power he once held. But the warmth of the small cottage behind him was a truth he could no longer betray. Jame did not hesitate for even a single second. He looked down at the treasure, the very things that had once defined his existence, and saw nothing but chains forged in greed. He realized that these diamonds were merely cold fragments of a life that had almost drained the soul from his chest. With a movement that was both sacred and noble, he reached down and grabbed a handful of the gold. But instead of treasuring it, he turned toward the small cooking fire crackling near the porch. In a breathtaking act of defiance, he hurled the jewelry and the coins directly into the heart of the flames. The crackling wood swallowed the gold, the orange firelight reflecting the fierce, unshakable determination in James' eyes. He turned back to the henchman, his muscular chest heaving with a power that no tailored suit could ever contain. He declared in a voice like thunder that this dot-knot cottage held more of his soul than his father's sterile white walls ever did. For here, he was a man who lived by his own sweat and for a love that was truly divine and profound. Diep stood behind him, her eyes noily with a mixture of terror and overwhelming joy. She saw her husband standing as a human shield between her and the ghosts of his past, his bruised and dirty hands protecting the small life they had built together. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear of poverty, but with a stunned realization of the magnitude of his sacrifice. When the henchmen realized that no amount of wealth could buy back the man who had found his freedom in the mud, they retreated into their black machines, leaving behind only the scent of exhaust and the echoes of their defeat. Jame did not watch them leave. He turned to Diep and pulled her into a fierce, protective embrace, his dusty skin pressing against hers in a silent covenant of survival. He whispered into her hair that he would rather burn every empire in the world than let a single shadow of his past dim the light in her eyes. In that touching and meaningful moment, the thatched cottage felt more like a fortress than a shack, built on a foundation of sacrifice that no tycoon could ever hope to understand. And so, dear viewers, we are reminded that a man's true kingdom is not measured by the luxury he possesses, but by the love he is willing to die for. When Jame chose the dirt floor over the glass tower, he didn't just save his relationship, he saved his very soul. He proved that the most sacred and noble path is often the one covered in dust and sweat, far away from the hollow promises of greed. Poverty is a heavy burden, but a heart without love is a much deeper grave. Their journey of resilience continues, proving that a love born in agony and soul-wrenching hardship is the only legacy that truly lasts. If your heart was moved by this sacred and noble choice, please subscribe and share this story. Join us next time as Jame and Diep face the dawn of a new life, where the only crown they wear is the devotion they have for one another.
Khi hoàng hôn buông xuống ngôi làng yên bình, quá khứ giàu sang của Jame bất ngờ ập đến chiếu hình hài những chiếc xe sang và chiếc rương đầy vàng bạc do cha anh gửi tới. Đó là lời đề nghị chuộc lại địa vị, nhưng đổi lấy việc anh phải rời bỏ Diep. Trước cám dỗ quyền lực, Jame không do dự, thẳng tay ném số tiền vàng vào lửa như một cách bại tuyệt với cuộc sống cũ. Hành động ấy khẳng định lựa chọn của anh, tình yêu quan trọng hơn mọi vinh hoa. Diep chứng kiến sự hy sinh ấy với nước mắt xen lẫn hạnh phúc, nhận ra cô chính là lý do khiến anh từ bỏ cả thế giới. Khi đám tay sai rút lui, căn nhà tranh nhỏ bé trở thành pháo đài của lòng kiên định, mở ra chương mới cho cuộc sống tự do, tình yêu chân thành.